This is Richard Ingram, and there is Tony Privatera, the podcast master, right over there. Lafayette was on the farewell tour 200 years ago. He was the nation's guest. This is the week of October the 7th. Lafayette is an idea, and ideas have consequences. It was interesting that I was reading a book by George Will, and I recommend it to you, American Happiness and Discontents. And George Will was talking about ideas and how books are really the embodiment of ideas and the best way to get them across, and that it takes an undistracted moment to read through a book and get the essence of a good idea. It dawned on me that Lafayette likewise was a walking idea. Chateaubriand, when Lafayette died, said this about Lafayette: Marquis de Lafayette had only one idea, but it was the one of the century. The one idea Lafayette had was liberty. Lafayette fixed on it. And Chateaubriand said this about that: whatever is fixed is fatal, and what is fatal is powerful. Lafayette's view of liberty, however, didn't find freedom in a framework of rights from which one pursues his or own ends and values. His liberty, rather, had to do with the freedom of self-government, and it requires citizens to be committed to the common good. Lafayette had thought that through, and Lafayette was likely unaware of it, but he was guilty of moral imagination. So from Frenchtown into Chesapeake Bay toward Baltimore on the evening of October the 7th aboard the steamboat, the United States. The Committee of Arrangements had given Lafayette and his son and his secretary, Auguste Levasseur, a guest room on board the United States as they were heading toward Fort McHenry and Baltimore. The rest of the contingent traveling with them slept in the dining hall, which had been converted to a dormitory, slept on mats. Auguste Levasseur, Lafayette's secretary, wanted to stretch his legs and went out on the gangway, and there he saw, bedding down on a mat amongst everybody else, was John Quincy Adams, the Secretary of State of the United States, soon to be President of the United States. Levasseur couldn't believe it, that here was a man of this rank that deigned to bed down on a mat in a dining hall with everybody else. The egalitarian spirit just was incredible to him. He went back and reported to Lafayette. Lafayette came back out, and in the interest of friendship, Lafayette enticed Adams to come back in. They put another bed in that guest room and had to convince Adams really to take advantage of that bed. At 9 a.m. the next morning, the United States, the steamboat, came into the harbor there at Fort McHenry, and it was already surrounded by other steamboats with throngs of guests wanting to get a glimpse of Lafayette. The Maryland, the Virginia, the Philadelphia, the Eagle, all of them accompanied Lafayette up to shore, where he came ashore and then saw the garrison there at Fort McHenry. It was in this same harbor, you recall, that Francis Scott Key, who was a lawyer, and he was trying to negotiate a prisoner swap. But when the British started to bombard Fort McHenry, September 13th, 1814, the next morning, Francis Scott Key woke up and the Stars and Stripes were still waving. And so that inspired Key to write The Defense of Fort McHenry, was the name of what he wrote. Subsequently, it was renamed the Star-Spangled Banner, and in 1931 became the national anthem. George Washington Parke Custis, Washington's step-grandson, arranged to have Washington's field tent deployed there at Fort McHenry. And this meant a lot to Lafayette. That field tent is now set up at Confederate widows at one time. Lafayette spent 5 days at Baltimore, big citizen reception there, And also he got a Doctor of Laws from the University of Maryland in Davidge Hall. Davidge Hall is a domed structure, unique in its way, and there's a plaque on the floor where Lafayette received that honorary degree. It's the College of Medicine there for the University of Maryland. Lafayette arrived at the Capitol, Washington, D.C., some 37 miles away on October the 12th. First, he went to the Capitol Rotunda, and then he went to the President's house and was greeted by President Monroe and his family and the cabinet, all in one room around one table. August Levasseur, interestingly, made this comment about Mrs. Monroe. Levasseur said, Ms. Monroe, although having passed the age of 50, can still be cited as a remarkably beautiful woman, which suggests that Levasseur thought 50 was the age of inflection, the point of dilapidation. There was also a Major General of Engineers there, Macomb, who told Levasseur that none in government seated at that table would dream of enriching himself, and that they would leave their posts less wealthy than when they arrived. And Macomb said that part of the reason for that is their salaries were too meager to feed the vice of greed. It's interesting that Lafayette and Monroe were good friends. They had both been at Valley Forge. They had been at the Battle of Monmouth. Monroe himself had been wounded at the Battle of Trenton, even before then. But Monroe and Lafayette bonded over something else. During the Reign of Terror, Lafayette had been a prisoner of state outside France, but his wife Adrienne had been imprisoned and was in the queue to be guillotined. James Monroe was the American minister to France at the time. He succeeded Gouverneur Morris. Both of those two, Morris and Monroe, lobbied the French government, told them that there would be consequences if the French government guillotined Lafayette's wife. The Reign of Terror came to an end. Adrienne lost her grandmother, her mother, and her oldest sister to the Reign of Terror. But Adrienne's life was spared and likely saved by Morris and James Monroe. And that's where Monroe and Lafayette really bonded. The remainder of the week to Columbia College, which is now George Washington University, the Jesuit College at Georgetown, and a visit with George Washington's step-granddaughter, Martha Parke Custis Peter. Till next time.